I remember the sound before the darkness, a sharp metallic snap that sliced through the stale air as if the house were cracking its own spine, and for a moment everything around me paused, holding its breath. I stood over the body I wasn't supposed to find, the beam of my flashlight trembling across the floor even though my hand was steady. I had seen death before, too many times for any healthy mind, but this scene felt different, as if the room itself were aware of my presence, tracking every inhale I dared to take. The shadows stretched too far along the walls, bending in slow waves as though reacting to something I couldn't see. The victim lay twisted, arm outstretched, fingers almost touching a small folded note that looked painfully deliberate, its paper unnaturally clean against the dusty floorboards. I didn't reach for it. Something about it felt warm, pulsing faintly with a heat that had no right to exist in a room colder than the night outside. My ears picked up a low hum, at first barely noticeable, then impossible to ignore, like an electric current running through the bones of the house. I stepped back, forcing myself to breathe evenly, trying to keep my mind from filling the silence with threats that weren't there, or maybe were. A creak echoed from somewhere behind me, too slow and heavy to be settling wood. I turned sharply, catching nothing but a slice of hallway swallowed in darkness. The air shifted at my back, a brief pressure against my shoulders as if someone had stepped close enough to speak, and a cold ripple traveled through me. I muttered something to break the tension, but the sound barely left my lips before the door behind me clicked shut on its own. The knob vibrated under my palm when I grabbed it, pulsing like a heartbeat out of sync. I pushed harder than necessary to force it open, stepping into the corridor as my instinct screamed to get out, to put walls and distance between me and whatever lingered inside that room. Outside, the street was unnaturally still, as if the world had paused in perfect silence, pretending nothing had happened. But I knew better. The house wasn't done with me. The note under the victim's hand wasn't done with me. And whatever had called me here tonight had just begun to pull me into something far older and darker than a simple crime scene. When the call first came in, I didn't think much of it, just another late-night voice hiding behind calm words and thin confidence, the kind of tone people use when they're trying not to sound afraid. She introduced herself as Mara, said she needed someone who didn't ask many questions, someone who could look at things the police ignored. Her voice trembled only once, barely noticeable, but enough for me to know she wasn't telling me everything. They never do. She asked me to meet her at a small cafe near the river, the kind of place where the lights always seem a little too dim and the staff pretend not to listen. When I arrived, she was already there, hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched, eyes fixed on the window as if expecting something to appear in the glass. She looked like someone who had spent too many nights awake, someone carrying a story too heavy for one person. When she finally spoke, her words came out in fragments. Her brother missing, strange noises in his house before he disappeared, the feeling of being watched even in daylight. She tried to play it off as paranoia, but the tension in her jaw told me she believed every word. She slid a small envelope across the table, its corners worn, as if she'd been turning it over in her hands for hours. Inside was a simple scrap of paper covered in uneven writing. He shouldn't have opened it. No signature, no explanation. She said it arrived 2 days before her brother vanished. I asked her what it meant. She shook her head, said she didn't know, said he hadn't told her anything except that he'd found something old, older than the house, and that he wasn't sure if it belonged to him anymore. The way she said it sent a chill through me, the same kind I felt in the room last night. I decided to visit the brother's place first. It was a narrow 2-story house on a silent street. The kind that looked ordinary until you stepped inside. Even before I crossed the threshold, I felt a subtle pressure in the air, like the atmosphere shifted around the doorway. I told myself it was the cold, nothing more. Inside, the house smelled faintly of burnt dust, the same metallic note I'd sensed at the crime scene. Books were scattered across the living room table, notebooks, old journals, pages filled with symbols I didn't recognize. Most of them were half erased, as if someone had tried to remove the writing but gave up halfway. One journal lay open, the ink smeared by what looked like a wet thumbprint. The entry was brief. It moves when I'm not looking. At first, I thought it referred to an object, maybe something he'd found, maybe something he'd imagined. But then the floorboards creaked behind me, slow, deliberate, like someone taking a cautious step. I turned, but nothing was there. No open windows, no drafts, no signs of intrusion. Just that hum again, faint, buried under the silence, as if the house had its own voice whispering beneath the walls. I checked the rest of the rooms, looking for anything that could explain his disappearance. Signs of struggle, unusual items, anything out of place. Instead, I found patterns, dust disturbed in perfect lines, chairs slightly misaligned, objects that seemed arranged with intention rather than accident. The more I looked, the more it felt like someone had been moving through the house with purpose, rearranging things while the brother slept or wasn't home. Or maybe while he was trying not to notice. When I reached his bedroom, the temperature dropped enough for my breath to fog. On the desk lay another note, written in the same shaky hand as the one from the scene. It follows sound. That was when I heard it again, a soft tap against the wall, followed by another, spaced like footsteps, too rhythmic to ignore. I kept my back straight, refusing to show the room any hint of fear. I'd seen many strange cases, but this one was different. It wasn't just about a disappearance. Something was weaving itself through every piece of evidence, something that didn't care whether I believed in it or not. I called Mara later that evening, told her I'd take the case fully, that I'd do whatever I could to find out what happened to her brother. I didn't tell her about the notes or the noises or the feeling that something had watched me from the corner of the room. I needed more information before bringing her into it. She hesitated before asking me a question that lingered long after the call ended. "Do you think he's still alive?" I didn't answer immediately. The truth was, I wasn't sure. But the house, the notes, the temperature dropping without reason, none of it felt like the end of a life. It felt like the beginning of something else, something waiting. And if I wanted to understand what was happening, I knew I'd have to go deeper, even if every instinct told me to walk away while I still could. By the next morning, the house had settled into my mind like a splinter I couldn't pull out. I kept replaying the notes, the shifting air, the sense that something had stood just behind me in the dark. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, the kind that twists shadows into shapes and whispers into warnings, but the truth was harder to ignore. Nothing I'd seen fit into any rational box. I started with the journals I'd taken from the brother's house, spreading them across my desk, trying to piece together fragments of thought from a man who clearly felt hunted. Most entries were frantic, written in rushed strokes, mentions of a noise at night, of objects shifting without explanation, of feeling watched even in crowded places. The handwriting deteriorated over time, becoming jagged, as if his hand shook constantly. One line stood out. "It listens for movement. It hates silence." I didn't know what it was, but every clue pointed to something the brother believed was real enough to fear. I spent hours cross-referencing the symbols in the margins with anything I could find. Old texts, obscure folklore, forgotten local legends. Most led nowhere, but one hinted at something unsettling, a belief that certain houses, when old enough and neglected long enough, could develop echoes of the lives lived inside them, shadows of events that repeated themselves like broken memories trapped in the foundation. But echoes didn't close doors. Echoes didn't write notes. I returned to the house at dusk. The moment I stepped inside, the air thickened, not with cold but with pressure, like the atmosphere was denser than it should be. Each breath felt heavier. I turned on my recorder, partly out of habit, partly because the brother's notes made me wonder if sound mattered more than I understood. The first floor was silent except for the occasional groan of old wood. No footsteps, no humming, nothing unusual. That changed when I reached the staircase. Halfway up, the recorder crackled. A faint distortion bled into the static, soft, rhythmic, like breathing. I froze, waiting to hear if it was mine. It wasn't. The sound continued even when I held my breath. When I reached the top, the hallway lights flickered. A slow knock echoed from one of the closed doors. 3 taps. A pause. Then 2 more. I forced myself to walk toward the sound, hands steady on the doorknob even as a cool tremor crawled across my spine. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was empty. No wind, no open window, no signs of movement. But on the floor lay a fresh trail of dust, footprints, forming a circle then stopping abruptly near the corner. They were small, too small to be the brothers, too defined to be accidental. The temperature dipped again, and the hum returned, louder than before, vibrating through the floorboards. My recorder caught it all. Then, from behind me, the door slammed shut. I spun around, heart in my throat, but the knob wouldn't turn. Something pressed against the other side. Not violent, not forceful, just present. Listening. Waiting. The hum grew louder. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them comforting. I stepped back, forcing myself to stay calm, scanning the room for anything that could help me understand. Only one thing stood out, a small wooden box on the desk, its lid slightly open as if someone had examined it recently. Inside was a scrap of fabric wrapped around a strange metal object, dull and misshapen, almost like a twisted key. Beneath it, another note, "Don't let it hear you leave." Before I could process that, the pressure at the door vanished. The knob loosened. I didn't run, but I didn't linger either. Outside, the night felt lighter, almost welcoming compared to the house. I played the recorder in my car, listening closely. At first, there was only static. Then breathing. Slow, uneven, like someone exhaling in the backseat. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. I replayed it again. The breathing grew louder each time, as if responding to being acknowledged. I shut it off. I spent the next few hours reviewing everything from the beginning. Mara's call, the missing brother, the notes, the strange object in the box. One pattern kept repeating. Sound. Every clue referenced it. Every event depended on it. Whatever existed inside the house didn't just react to noise. It followed it. It learned through it. The brother must have found something, maybe the object, maybe the box, that awakened whatever lived in the walls. And when he tried to understand it, it started watching him. The realization clicked slowly, like a lock turning into place. The house wasn't just haunted by something. It was something. Something that listened. Something that moved when no one watched. Something that had been waiting for a long, long time. And now it knew my voice. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the breathing from the recorder, quiet at first, then closer, as if it was standing just behind me, waiting for my pulse to steady so it could match its rhythm to mine. At dawn, I made coffee strong enough to pull me back into myself, but the unease stayed, heavy in my chest. I kept turning the metal object over in my hands. The twisted shape felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, as if it hadn't been made but pulled into existence by something that didn't understand how objects were supposed to look. I knew I couldn't involve Mara yet. Not until I understood what her brother had stepped into. The more I read through the journals, the clearer the picture became. He hadn't discovered an artifact. He had awakened a pattern. A presence tied to the house like a muscle memory, reacting to sound, feeding on motion, attaching itself to whoever tried to study it. He wrote about nights when the walls seemed to breathe, about the way silence felt like a trap, how staying still for too long made the shadows crawl closer. In the final entry, his handwriting barely held itself together. It wants a voice. It wants mine. I returned to the house one last time, not out of confidence but necessity. If the brother was alive, or something close to it, the answers would be inside. The moment I stepped through the door, the pressure returned, thicker than before, as if the house recognized me. The floor hummed beneath my boots, a low vibration that grew stronger when I reached the living room. I placed the metal object on the table, and the hum sharpened, rising into a faint ringing that pressed against my eardrums. I spoke softly, letting my voice travel just enough for whatever listened. I didn't ask for peace or permission. I asked for the truth. At first there was nothing. Then the air tightened, and the familiar tapping started, this time from every wall, every corner, a slow, patient rhythm moving closer, syncing with the pulse in my throat. The shadows along the ceiling stretched downward, not like figures but like memories, traces of something that had learned the shape of human fear and wore it loosely. The temperature plummeted. The house exhaled. And a voice, not spoken, not heard, but felt, rippled through the room, brushing against my thoughts like a cold finger. Not words. Not language. Just intention. I understood then. The brother hadn't been taken. He had been absorbed. The house fed on sound, on movement, on presence, and the more he tried to understand it, the deeper he sank into it. He had become another echo in its walls. The ringing intensified as if confirming my realization. My recorder, still in my pocket, activated on its own, crackling with static. Through the noise, faint and broken, came a whisper shaped like a plea, his voice, or what was left of it. Stop, listening. The shadows recoiled as if struck. The vibrations snapped into stillness. For the first time since I entered, the house felt uncertain. That was my moment. I grabbed the metal object and threw it against the floor. It shattered with a sound that cut through the silence like a blade. The house convulsed. Every wall groaned. The hum turned into a roar, and the air seemed to tear open around me. I didn't wait to see what came next. I ran. Not out of fear, though fear chased me with every step, but because I knew staying meant becoming part of the house's memory, another voice trapped in the plaster. When I burst outside, the noise stopped instantly. The house behind me sagged, its windows dark, its walls settling into ordinary stillness, as if the thing inside had retreated back into sleep. I stood in the cold morning light, breathing hard, my hand shaking. I didn't go back. Not then. Not now. I called Mara and told her the truth in the only way she could bear. That her brother was gone. That whatever he found consumed him. I didn't tell her about the voice or the shadows or the way the house seemed to recognize me. Some truths don't belong to the living. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was over. That destroying the object had severed whatever connection the house had to its hunger. But at night, when the world is quiet enough for doubt to grow, I sometimes hear tapping in the walls of my apartment, soft and rhythmic, like footsteps tracing a familiar path. I tell myself it's just old pipes, old wood, the city settling. But deep down, in a place I try not to look too closely, I know the truth. The house wasn't the source. It was only a vessel. And vessels can break, but the things inside them, things that feed on sound, that learn voices, that follow those who hear them, those things don't disappear. They wait. They listen. And one night, when the tapping grows louder, I fear it will answer to my voice the same way it once answered his.